Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is Nate Burt, host of Secrets of Social Impact Communicators. Hope you're all having a great week. Today's guest is particularly special to me personally, and I know will be to you as well. Deborah Marshall is Director of Sales and Marketing at Missouri Life. Now, for those of you who don't know, I'm headquartered west of St. Louis, Missouri, and Missouri Life is an iconic brand with magazines, online properties, TV, really just an opportunity for Missourians to engage in everything great that our state has to offer, from lifestyle to businesses to history. And Deborah and I worked together previously before she became a client of mine. She was my publisher when I was an editor of a newspaper, the Boonville Daily News in West Central Missouri. And so Deborah is going to bring to our conversation today practical insights for all of you out there working on social purpose issues, whether it's climate change or racial equity or community well-being, whatever your case might be. Deborah has tremendous depth of experience in being a go-getter, being someone who is a strategic and creative thinker, someone who really has a lot of deep expertise in local and regional communications. And ultimately, all of us need help reaching people individually, one-on-one, as well as at the local level, if we're ever going to have the kind of global impact that we aspire to have. And so you're going to learn a ton from Deborah. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. One housekeeping note, I wanted to share that my brand new book, 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators, is going to be published, due out November 2023. And so you can pre-order that book. It's my framework, how I work with all of my clients and partners on social impact communication strategy and content implementation and really leadership. What is the mindset of a social impact communicator? How do you nurture and bolster those around you, your colleagues, your executive leaders, other partner organizations outside of your business or nonprofit? And how do you make the most of the time that we have to make a difference on some of these big global issues? How do you level up on your influence? Again, it's called 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. It's available now for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever other fine books are sold. Take a look. I think you'll find a tremendous amount of value and would love to hear from you as you have the chance to read the book. All right. With that, let's dig into today's show. Well, I am so honored and delighted to have with me today Deborah Marshall, Director of Sales and Marketing at Missouri Life. Deborah, how are you today?
I am super great. Thank you so much for having me, Nate.
Oh man, it's a treat, Deborah. I've loved working with you over the years. Honored to have Missouri Life as a client. And of course, we've worked together in past lives, which I've talked a little bit about in the intro to today's show. But let's talk about you and your experience, because you have so much insight to share with my audience. Talk a little bit, Deborah, if you could, about yourself and what you do at Missouri Life.
Sure. So I grew up in Iowa and graduated from Stephens College, maybe something like 100 years ago. And I met my husband while I was at Stephens, and he became a Navy pilot, and we lived kind of all over the country and outside the country. And so I spent about 30 years in the newspaper industry and was super, super lucky to work with the newspaper industry no matter where we were stationed in the United States. So I was able to work in so many different cool places, different demographics, all kinds of neat stuff throughout the country for a long time. And as you said, I'm Director of Sales and Marketing at Missouri Life magazine, and I wear a lot of different hats.
No surprise knowing you, Deborah. Tell us about some of those hats.
Well, my first and foremost hat is to drive the sales of the company. And so far this year, we're up about 10% to last year. So I'm pretty pleased about that. And one hat that you kind of share with me is really the marketing side of the company. My degree is in marketing communications. And so I find it very important to spend that time and effort to try to find new clients, which for us are subscribers on one side, and then on the other side are businesses. So there's a couple of different strategies on how to grow both those sides through our marketing efforts.
That's amazing. And I love that perspective. And, you and I both share a passion for newspapers. It's where I started my career. And it makes me wonder, given the fact that you've worn all of these different hats, when did you first know you wanted to go into, I call it purpose-driven work, but I think more broadly, it's like, how do you use communications, marketing, advertising as a vehicle to help people, right? Help your clients, help your audience. What excites you about that kind of work?
It's so complicated. And I tried to kind of put it in one thought process, and I'll say that, and then I'll go back to kind of the complicated part. But I got into media sales when I was at Stevens. My marketing professor thought it'd be great for me to run the newspaper there. And I curse her sometimes, like she put me in a position. I just fell in love with it. Like, had I not walked through that door, I never would have been part of the newspaper world. But actually, sort of my purpose-driven work began in media sales, which sounds really strange. But if you think about it, media sales, I mean, for some, they don't care. They just walk in the door and take the money and move on to, the next customer. But for me, it was really super important that my customers succeeded. And my purpose was to help them grow their business and watching them thrive, because the more successful they were, then the more successful I was going to be. It's kind of that way. And watching some of my customers throughout the years, just watch their excitement of having people walk in the door with a newspaper ad or a flyer or something and buy exactly what they advertised was super exciting to me, because that meant I did my job for them. So, I mean, that's always been really important to me. And I've always, still to this day, sort of been surprised when somebody says, oh yeah, somebody brought the ad in. I'm like, they did? And it's that influence, and it's that influence that you have on people in a positive way to push them into doing something they never would have thought about doing, like going into a new business and buy something because they saw it in the magazine or the newspaper. So that's always been very, very exciting to me. This also, kind of the purpose-driven piece, also carried over for me really when I became publisher of a newspaper. I was super committed to that purpose of making sure that I was very serious about its importance of the newspaper and the community. And I took that role very seriously. And that can be very exciting or it can be stressful, depending on the issue at hand. And you and I know about those, right?
Yes.
And the other thing is that it's really exciting to see the efforts that have a positive impact on the community, even when the journey to get there is a rough one. And not always is the purpose, the journey while you're in your purpose-driven world, always easy. And that's true, I think, in a lot of things, especially in business and some other, organizations that I've been involved with.
I love that perspective, Deborah. Thank you for sharing that. And you bring to mind a really important concept. I think I've heard it called by one of my past leaders, translational communication, right? I talk about this, and you and I were talking about my new book project, 7 Secrets of Highly Effective Social Impact Communicators. And one of the secrets that I see people who are extremely talented at this, like yourself, like others that I've had the privilege of getting to work with, is that ability to really translate between a business and an audience member, or between your deeply held values and mine. Because again, to your point, it forces us out of our comfort zone and makes us do things, make changes that are both in our best interest and also that we wouldn't have done without that message. So I love that vision, and I love the stewardship ethic that you're approaching your work with, and recognizing the place of prominence and also responsibility that communication has. Something else that really strikes me about having worked with you over the years, Deborah, is you are a force to be reckoned with when it comes to creative thinking, right? And outside of the box thinking for bringing communications messages and audiences together with businesses, et cetera. I mean, what is the source of your creativity? What insights do you have to share with listeners about just being creative in the kind of role that you hold?
You give me far too much credit, my friend. You're very kind. Creativity comes in a lot of different ways. I think if you're very serious about your work and you continue to learn and you learn and you learn and you learn about all kinds of different things, and you keep your mind open to a lot of ways of thinking about things. Some people come at creativity with, we've always done it this way. And that is like last year's suit. It doesn't work. You can't always do it that way. I'm very fortunate that through my life and especially here at the magazine, I have a phenomenal team to work with. And we share a lot of ideas. Sometimes we just sit around our conference table and share ideas and just bounce ideas off each other and think about wacky things. And everything comes out. It's not, well, I'm afraid to give you my idea because somebody will think it's weird. Every idea sparks another piece. And we try to challenge each other sometimes on, well, tell me more about what you're thinking. How would that work? Or, sometimes the ideas do come out and you're like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. But most of the time, it's our team trying to connect those things. But some of the ways that we look at the creativity is kind of if they're a high value for our business or a low value for our business. And there's two couple of things to think about. So when you're looking at an event, for example, an event could be maybe a low business priority. It may not make a lot of money, but it may have a high value priority in as a media piece of brand awareness. It might be a piece, you're trying to introduce your product to a number of different people, and you may not make a lot of money, but that value really is in that communication of trying to get your brand out there. Or it could be a new publication that we're coming out with that has high brand, high value, and has high dollars. So those are kind of the things that, the two pieces that we look at, and how I've not maybe necessarily put it that way in the past, but it's kind of how I've kind of evolved to come through it, because creativity happens in a lot of different areas that benefits the company as a whole. I hope that makes sense. That's kind of rambled that on a little bit, but
No, I think that makes total sense, Deborah. And I love some of those ideas you shared related to the importance of collaboration, right? And bouncing ideas off of each other. Obviously, in this modern and informed era, many people, including myself, are using AI tools, ChatGPT and others, as a brainstorming partner, which is great. And it also has its limitations relative to the brainstorming, the creativity that comes talking with other human beings who have done this a long time and are super big thinkers. So I love that piece. And I also love the idea of matrixing communications opportunities through multiple lenses, right? High impact, maybe not immediate ROI, but on the long haul of raising awareness of your brand and getting the word out there, it pays dividends again and again. So I really appreciate that thinking.
Yes. Oh, thank you. And the last thing that I will offer, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest this for a lot of people, but I'm just not really afraid of anything. So fear, I've noticed just in my lifetime, people get afraid. They're like, no, I don't want to take the risk to do that. Well, you can minimize your risk in your creativity thinking by adding some of those metrics that you're talking about and kind of putting that together. But being afraid to try something new and getting that in the marketplace, I just don't have any fear of that. You know what? It'll work. And the last thing that it'll work or it won't work, but the last thing I ever want to have is to say, gosh, I wish I would have tried that. Maybe it would have worked. And so sometimes I try to add a little fear component. Maybe I should think about that a little bit more. But really, if you don't have a fear of it, then you can get out there and really go hustle and get it done. So, and that's either a good thing or a bad thing, not having a lot of fear.
No, I think that is such an important message, Deborah. And I've seen that in my own career. The times when you have the most regret is when you don't try something. And again, you have to be professional, right? You have to build those relationships that are lasting on the business side and with your audience. But to your point, courage and sort of putting fear on the shelf for a moment and trying something, I think can have such a powerful payoff. So I love that message.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things, again, I'm sharing several details that you may or may not be excited that I'm sharing, but I think this one's really important. And that is, you've always struck me as someone who is both positive and high energy. And I know that can't always be easy, but I am curious. I think that's something all of us as professional communicators struggle with, which is, how do I stay positive when times seem difficult? And how do I maintain the momentum to get things done, as you've described it? How do you go about balancing those two aspects, optimism and energy?
So I don't know if you'll think this is kind of funny, but it's kind of true. So if the ADH drug had been around when I was a little kid, my mother would have been all over that. She would have been all over it. She would have been like, we got to settle her down. I was born with the energy. She used to send me to run around the house. It was with me since the day I was born. But I learned a long time ago. And it was, I think when I was about 12 years old, something happened in my family. And I was just like, I either have the opportunity to be positive or I have the opportunity to be negative. And that choice was up to me. So how that ever would play out, it just seemed to be like, life would be a lot more fun if I would stay positive and start looking at things half full, instead of half empty. And that really kind of changed my perspective from that point on. And I was also an athlete. So my focus and the intensity that you see and sort of that drive is really driven by the background of being an athlete. And, a lot of those traits and skills have carried over into the business world. I just happen to be one of those people that are super competitive. And so that's kind of the thing that drives everything every day. I've mentioned to some people in the past that I'd rather win than eat kind of thing. And it's the reason why I was drawn to the advertising industry, because it was so competitive. And a lot of times I just think it's a choice, and it's hard. It's hard to separate, all the things that are going on in the world, and whether you look at your day of, I've got a huge hill to climb. I got a lot of revenue to generate. I got a lot of things to do. You have to put it in perspective, and you have to take one thing at a time and accomplish it. Because if you don't, you'll just get mired down in the things that are sort of kind of you think you're failing at. But yeah, and you can't do it all at once. And, in the newspaper industry years ago, God, I could juggle 100 things at once, and it was nuts. And did I really accomplish everything I wanted to do? I mean, I accomplished quite a bit, but as time went on, I learned how to really schedule my time. So I have an organization to that time. And that's really what keeps my energy up and my focus. And I also try to be around people that are positive and have a forward-thinking attitude. Yeah, I don't like to be around people who are always doom and gloom, because that's not fun. It's not any fun, but it's your focus. And I think that's kind of the centerpiece, is the focus of that. And I also work on ways to continue to be authentic. I think in the communication world, if you're authentic, that's going to keep you resonating all the time. And it's a day-to-day thing. And the more authentic you are, the more you get to continue to grow and do what you're doing. I did want to mention one thing too. It's sort of in the communication, as a communicator, things can be tricky when you're communicating on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things I've really tried to do is keep an editorial filter in my head. And so when you keep the editorial filter in your head, not everything will come out your mouth, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes.
And kind of what you're thinking. And I really spend a lot of time in communication and that focus to make sure that everything that I say is communicated clearly, and will always, no matter what the situation, keeps everybody's integrity intact for whatever it is. And I think that is super important. I learned that from someone years ago, and she was a manager of mine, and she said, always in communications to keep integrity intact of everything. And I always thought that was great advice.
Yeah, wow. Deborah, those are all tremendous nuggets of wisdom that you've shared there. And I love that integrity piece, because again, it is a daily choice, to your points that you've raised, to be energetic, to be positive, to see things in a certain light. And so just recognizing that choice, and also putting others first and thinking about leaving the integrity of everyone involved intact. So often overlooked, but so important. So thank you for raising those.
Sure.
Let's get tactical for a moment. What do you see as some of the biggest mistakes organizations make related to their marketing and advertising, and how can we avoid those mistakes?
Yeah, I love that question, Nate. I love it, because there's more than 3, I can tell you that. But several that kind of pop into my mind are, not knowing your audience is the biggest mistake I see people not understanding. And, and right now in our current climate, I have watched a lot of brands destroy themselves because they forgot who their audience is and who's buying their products or their service. It's not really hard. I mean, it's once you figure that out, once you learn your audience, sort of your plans kind of become a little bit easier. I also think that there's folks that think that there's like one silver bullet to all your marketing. I hear so many businesses say, and this is really kind of mostly in the small to mid-sized businesses that I hear this a lot, is I'm on social media, or all my business is word of mouth. And it makes me cringe, because I say, well, then in essence, you're asking people to be your salespeople, to your customers to be your salespeople. And do you really want to do that? That to me is like gambling. That's like a huge risk that you're saying, well, I'll get word of mouth and I'll be happy with that. And then the other thing I think about too is not setting a realistic budget for marketing and really identifying your core audience. If you're going to be in business and you're going to want to continue to grow, you have to set aside a budget, and you have to start somewhere. So some folks say, okay, I got $500 a month. Okay, well, then let's start with that $500 a month, and let's build it. Let's grow it. Let's get it there, and let's work on building your audience. And here's an example of how to use a digital tool to build your audience. I hope it's okay if I kind of expand on that.
Yeah, go for it, please.
Because it's really worked for some of my customers, and it really, I think, to me, it's a smart thing to do. I work with a lot of people that don't know that they can retarget digitally off their own websites. So when people come to their websites, they can send a message back to them digitally. Well, one of the metrics that comes out of that digital piece is where your impressions and where people are coming from. So I work with a business that does just a small amount of impressions a month for his retargeting. And we now are almost to a year. And now while doing that, we can go back and look and say, okay, really, where does this make sense now that we want to spend our digital dollars? You're getting this many impressions from St. Louis, from Columbia, from Kansas City. Now we can start to see a pathway and a marketing plan to how to spend dollars in the future and how to continue to grow that. So it's very simple. It doesn't take a lot of money. I mean, I think this customer is spending $100 a month. That's nothing to figure out that marketing plan. That's great. So back to that creativity piece you were talking about, you can also be creative with your clients to say, okay, we don't have a lot of money, but let's figure out how we can find out where your customers are coming from, because he's a bed and breakfast. They don't know. I mean, they have no idea, but now they do. And so it's going to help us build a better marketing plan and being able to, so that the point is to be able to figure out how to use the tools to help build the budget you have and then continue to grow. So, and the last thing I want to say too is you could also, I was told this by somebody years ago and I never believed it, but now it's true. Take advantage of your vendors. Those that are working with a lot of vendors, whether they're white labeled, whether they're not, whether they're service oriented, learn from your vendors. There's some vendors out there that have a tremendous amount of knowledge on the particular industry or service that you're working in. So take advantage of that. Become their friend, learn from them, because they're going to have maybe a different view or a different set of lenses than you will to be able to help you grow your business.
Yeah, those are great pieces of advice, Deborah. Thank you for sharing that. And I love the idea of collaborating with your clients in your case and really drilling down into the data, using those tools, knowing how to use them, and then using that to make a plan where in the past we wouldn't have had those kinds of insights. Really, really powerful. You work across a variety of types of media. What kinds of trends are you seeing, maybe one or two, that other communicators who listen to this podcast should be paying attention to over the next 12 to 18 months?
But first-party data is a big trend. There's going to be a lot of changes in our privacy in our digital space. We're doing it here too. I would encourage, and I am encouraging my own clients to really look at building their first-party data. And the first-party data is just very simple. It's just getting people's email addresses, basically, and having the opportunity to remarket back to them and having that approval from that particular email address. You know, there's a lot of things that are going to be changing with our phones. So that marketing capability is going to change. But the bigger your first party data is, the better you will be able to market for yourself. Or if you're in the media and you have a large first party data, you'll have a great audience to be able to sell to or customers to buy to, because those are going to be prime niche audiences. The days of the gigantic audiences of 300,000 email newsletters, that kind of stuff, that's kind of going away. And the more niche types of companies that have maybe 50,000 email database are more desirable because those audiences are more engaged. So when you develop your first party data, it's audiences that want to be engaged with your brand. So they're more valuable. They're more, which we find more engaged. So therefore they work better for both, for us and for our customers. And then the other thing that I think we really should be thinking about, and of course, and I may be biased, this may be my bias, but it's anecdotal for me. I think that legacy media, print in particular, is going to do a huge boomerang. I'm starting to see people really wanting to have the print pieces back to be able to hold in their hands. And so what I'm saying by that is those that really didn't have a long relationship with print, and it might be just some of our younger folks that are in the media, don't poo-poo it. People still respond very well to print, whether it's newspaper, magazine, some direct mail. Certain things can happen with some great print products. And the other thing is just to be mindful that people do age into print, and that usually starts in the mid-30s. It really does. And it's always been like that. So just to think about in the next year and a half, really because of the data issues that are going to happen with privacy, that first party data is really going to be important. And then to keep your mind open on other areas of spending that marketing budget or making those recommendations to your clients, that this really might be a good thing. And the other piece, just from the learning point, and it's just because I think it's really critical, is that there are lots of studies out there that when people read print, they comprehend so much better. They have long-term comprehension, and it's way better for learning. So I think that's coming back. That little boomerang's coming back. And I will say that this year, our print pieces have really grown tremendously. So just everybody try to keep your eyes and ears open to a lot of things, even if it's old, tried and true.
That's so interesting. Deborah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, as a fellow print person, I would be delighted to see that and excited to hear those. The trend line is curving positively, and that first party data piece, again, in my experience as well, so essential and only going to be more so in the months and years ahead. So thank you for those insights. You have a deep and wide professional network, and you build great long-term relationships. And so I'm curious for my audience, what advice do you have about building great long-term partners and maintaining those relationships when things are as busy as they are?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I mean, building relationships is a lot of work, and the networking is a lot of work, and it's a give and take. And I think you have to give more than you can take, but then in the long run, you'll give back more, if that makes any sense to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I always recommend to folks to get involved in your communities and join organizations that you're passionate about. And they don't necessarily have to be for your business, but sometimes they do turn out to help your business. I mean, I got involved with a tourism group in Central Missouri that I've been involved with for 21 years now. And it's just a passion that I have with this organization. And I do all of their marketing and their magazine now. And it just happened to turn out that way. And that's not like that won't happen for everybody, but it's just part of being out there and visible. And I always encourage my own team to get involved with local groups in their own backyard, because really your best ability to network and grow your business is in your backyard. But it takes time, and never burn a bridge. I've seen so many people burn the bridge. I know it's an old saying, but it's true. And no matter where you go, what you do, you just have to put your best foot forward, no matter what the case, and always provide a positive solution. So no matter whatever goes on, because people still buy from people they like. Mm-hmm. So your reputation is everything. I always say that I sell space, right? I sell space in print, and then we sell it in the digital world. And people are buying space from me. And it's because they're comfortable with spending that money, because they believe that I will do the best I can to get them the very best that they can get. And I think that's just in networking, and it's just building those relationships. And it's kind of bad when you get nailed by somebody that doesn't follow through on what they're supposed to do. But I mean, that's life. But you just always have to do your best. And always, like I said before, is to always be authentic. And if you're authentic and you follow through and you work hard. And the other thing that I think is important is that if you work to try to connect other people to help them grow too, it's icing for a lot of people. So, and always, always, always keep your ears open in every conversation that you're having, because something might pop up and you go, I need to tell Joe Bob that this is going on, because I think that's going to help his business, whether it relates to you or not. And those are so many things. And to keep your ears open and listening and making all those connections mentally, and to continue to learn about everything, and always keep your eyes and ears open, because you just never know when that little nugget of information will pop up and be helpful.
I love that, Deborah. Alert and authentic. And that brings me to my next question, which you've talked to this to some degree already, but I'd love your thoughts. You work specifically a lot in local and regional marketing and communications, and you've talked about the importance of a dedicated, targeted audience and the higher levels of engagement they often display compared to a massive national audience. But why is that sort of ability to communicate locally and regionally so important in an era when any business owner or nonprofit anywhere can literally talk to anyone on planet Earth?
Right. Isn't that just the most bizarre thing?
It really is.
And it is. It's like you can put a website out there and it's like somebody in India can be like, hey,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah, it's amazing and it's kind of scary at the same time. But, the reality is that most people's trading areas are within a 5 to 20 mile radius, maybe like the state like we are. So we cover, how many miles is that? I don't even know. I should really figure that out. How many miles is Missouri? I should figure that out.
It'll be a research project. That's right.
That'll be a good one. But it's a lot. I know that it's a lot. But so really people do their business in their own backyard. But the other thing is that regionally and local media have the most credibility. So, anybody can throw their website out there and get response from India, but really you want to be associated with the media that people respect and respond to, because then you're going to generate better response. And it's going to be people from really a trading area that can come and do business with you. The challenge with all that's going on today is the fragmentation. It used to be in the old days, I could see a customer have to pick 5 things to purchase. It would be a newspaper, a magazine, direct mail, a TV, a radio, and maybe a billboard. So that may be 6. That was it. Now you can pick 100 different radio stations. Like I said, a zillion places on the internet. There's it's insane trying to figure out how to do that. And when you narrow that big piece of all of that down, you just whittle it down to, okay, this is where I'm going to get most of my trading in my business. And that's really in my own backyard. And to pick the pieces that are going to be the most credible for you to be part of, the people are going to respond to. I still have a local newspaper where I live, and it's shocking. I mean, I love it. And it's just family-owned guy owns it. And it's not the greatest newspaper, but it covers everything that we need to know. And you know what? People advertise in that product because it's going right to everybody's backyard and people get results out of it. So you don't have to be all the way out there. You got to be strategic about to focus on where you think those particular pieces of media are going to be most credible for you.
I love that. Trustworthiness, credibility, that's really powerful and so important in an era when there's so much out there that you can't trust. And to circle back for a minute, according to Wikipedia, which, take with a grain of salt, Missouri is about 241 miles wide and 300 miles top to bottom. So for future reference on Jeopardy.
Right. So we got a pretty big state, right? That's pretty big.
That's right. It's a big space. Deborah, what's one question about communications and marketing that most organizations aren't asking but should be?
Who's accountable? Who's accountable for it, right? So marketing is in communicating, it's a full-time job to be able to do that stuff. So an organization has to sit down and say, okay, who's going to be accountable for that function? Because if nobody's held accountable, I can tell you what happens. We've experienced it here many times where you're like, oh, did that e-blast go out to promote whatever that was? No, I thought you were doing that. No, I thought you were doing that. And it's just mind-blowing when that happens, because there's no accountability because nobody's responsible for it. So I would just encourage everybody to designate who that accountability could be. And it could be multiple people. I mean, some people could be responsible just for, an e-blast. Some people could be responsible for making sure that the ads and wherever your publication are going to, you're responsible for those things. So just make sure there's that accountability function. Yeah. And if you have to break them up, you got to break them up. Or you have to find cool guys like Nate to help you do it too. So we hold him accountable to a lot of stuff too. So that's okay. And the other thing about communication is it takes time, consistency, and organization to accomplish it. And it doesn't happen overnight. And it's a building process, and it's a building block on building blocks on building blocks. And it just takes a long time. But if you're consistent and you're organized and your brand message is good and it has a great value proposition, you should be great. But don't expect it to turn very quickly. It might take a year or two. It just might. But once you do that, then you'll have a great basis for further and future communication, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Deborah. I think that accountability piece and having processes in place and a solid foundation, I think everyone out there is shaking their heads yes right now, because we've all experienced that when it's working great and also when it's not working so great.
Yeah, and it's the last piece that a company thinks about because there are so many other things that get pushed to the front burner. But it truly is one of the hardest things to get accomplished. But Another thing that we've done here is we set aside a weekly meeting, and then it's called our marketing meeting. So that's another way to have accountability to get things accomplished.
Absolutely. Deborah, you raise a really good point, which is like the last things that we think about. What's one of the things you do to stay sane while you're navigating all of the inevitable, unpredictable ups and downs of the kind of work that you do?
Yeah. Yeah, some things are harder than others.
Amen.
I will say that. But interestingly, I don't listen to a lot of power podcasts. I don't. Oh, maybe I should. But I don't. I just feel like there are lots of people out there kind of repeating the same thing in a different way. That's just my opinion.
No, completely.
Yeah. But I try to learn all the time. And I really try to keep my mind open to all the possibilities and view all those opportunities. And if you do that, you can kind of navigate through unpredictable stuff. So can you imagine in 1999, we get a phone call from, I worked for Gannett at the time. We get a phone call for a meeting. We didn't have Zooms. We just had phones to talk through. And we had this meeting, and the corporate folks said, yeah, we're going to be launching something called cars.com. And everybody's going to buy a car online. And I'm looking around the conference room and I'm thinking, are these people smoking something? I'm like, what is going on? And then they said, yeah, and then we're going to launch something called Career Builder. So people are going to find jobs online. You're out of your mind. You're completely out of your mind. And so, but then I thought, well, maybe this is a great way I can try to make money. Well, yes. And that was true. But I had to change my thought process of, I think you people are crazy, but then I got to learn about it, right? And you've got to learn everything you can, because you have to be able to legitimately and have some credibility when you go out and launch these types of new products. But that's just a perfect example of how the whole entire navigating the inevitable of all of that, which really, and as my future has gone on, served me very, very, very well. And when I learned all about that in the late 90s, it just set my foundation for learning all the things that were going to happen with the digital space. And I was able to exponentially learn way faster than anybody else because nobody else took the time to do it. And so when all these new things came in, like Facebook and digital programmatic, all this kind of stuff came in, it wasn't such a leap for me to learn. So there's those inevitable things of this new stuff that shows up. But if you keep learning and you keep building on top of that, it will get much, much, much easier to navigate those types of items. I know that was kind of really simplified, but it was a big deal back then. I mean, everybody was like, even the car dealers, people are going to buy a car online? No, I don't think so. It's a totally different story now. And kind of the last thing I'll add to that is I try to, sounds kind of strange, but I try to meditate every day. And it's not really meditating. It's just sort of like, okay, I can take on the challenges today. I'm ready. I clear my head before I get to work. And when I get out of my car, I shut the door and it's work time. And it's that compartmentalization of focusing on the things that you're going to be able to focus on that day. And the other thing is you can only control what you can control. And so that's really, it's the tried and true thing again, because you can't control everything else that's going on around you, but you can control the things, and then those become successes. And then you keep building on top of that. And it continues to build your heart to keep saying, I'm doing the right thing and it's all great. And in the end, the best part that helps me navigate through all of it is when people come up to me, and like I was mentioning to you, I was at the Botanical Gardens last weekend for the market fair and had a booth there.
Right.
I must have had 200 people come up to me and say, absolutely love your magazine. You guys do phenomenal work. And that's the purpose-driven part that's the best, right? Because that's what you want. You want to have people have that joy from the work that you do. And thank you for that, because it has such an impact into their life.
Beautiful. I love that, Deborah. Thank you for sharing that. And again, I love the idea of really being mindful about the stories we tell ourselves, right? The ways we keep ourselves encouraged versus discouraged. And again, the authenticity I think that you use to approach your day-to-day life, and always learning about new things. I think that's such a powerful reminder to all of us, just to stay alert and look for opportunities to really grow ourselves for the long term. As we sort of get closer to the end of our interview today, Deborah, I have just a couple of last questions. The first one, as communicators doing purpose-driven work, we use stories to open people's hearts and minds. You used the word joy earlier, which I love, like you're creating joy for your audience and your customers. What's one story you've encountered over the past year? It might be a book, a movie, whatever, that has changed or shaped the way you think about your life and your work?
That's such a loaded question. It is. It's a really hard one. There are so many stories, and there are stories too that personally impact me, that help me think about things professionally. And a couple movies come to mind. Certainly The Sound of Freedom this year had a huge impact. It's a story that needed to be told, and it had such an impact on people. My sister didn't realize the problems with child trafficking. It's an issue that I've watched for a really long time. Particularly where we live, there's a lot of it because of the interstate. And it's near and dear to me too, because when I was in high school, a kid who was can you believe this, was a newspaper carrier at 5:00 in the morning when I was off to go to swim practice, got abducted by somebody and he was stolen. And it was 1982. And it's never left me. It's always been part of my life because, his family, we were all neighbors, right? And so the things that family had to go through at the time and their whole story now kind of was brought out with The Sound of Freedom. And I think that it's that purpose-driven part of people in the military that took control of that. And a guy stood up and said, I'm leaving. I was military. I'm leaving. I'm getting out of Homeland Security. I'm going to go do this. Because he did that, he made the world better. And I sort of relate that to sort of my husband's military experience. And I also saw Top Gun, the remake of Top Gun. I saw the first one. The first one was amazing. It's the whole reason why I fell in love with my husband, because he's like, I'm a Navy pilot. And I'm like, I'm kind of with you.
I love that.
And so the things that those, even to most people listening to this, are probably like, this chick's a little crackpot. But I think that the mission that's bigger than the story that's told, and the mission is bigger than you are, is what really is the story. And there are so many of those things that happen. And you have to remember, in my day-to-day life, like when we're talking about, navigating stuff, I'm like, navigatingcars.com. Well, somebody's trying to navigate in their life, trying to get back to their family, right? Mm-hmm. So it kind of helps you put things in perspective of really what you're doing and what other things are going on in the world, and how important some of these stories that are out there that really need to be told. And you and I, Nate, we won't go into it, but you and I told a story years ago that had such an impact on people. But I'll tell you what, today, I still get feedback from that story and how grateful they are that you and I had the energy, the commitment, and the courage to tell that story. And I think about some of that in The Sound of Freedom. It's kind of that same thing, and how important those things are to be out there. So those are kind of the things that come to mind. And then I have one more that's kind of off. It doesn't really fit into the question.
Yeah, please.
So growing up, my favorite movie of all time is Rocky, the very first one. The fictional movie about Rocky and his life. And his life was a 1 in a million chance, just like mine. And think about what he put into driving and doing and winning and doing all those things. That story had such an impact on my life. It completely changed it for me forever. As an athlete, as a business person, and in everything that I do every day. It's kind of funny. I have this gigantic poster of Rocky that, he runs up the stairs in Philadelphia, and he's up there. And I have the movie poster. It's the original movie poster. I have that hanging in my house.
I love it.
That's so crazy. But it is. But so those are just some of the stories. But gosh, there are so many. And there are so many stories we tell all the time in the magazine of people that do amazing things. And there's just a lot of them. And it's what we do. We tell these stories. But those are the ones that kind of pop to my mind today.
Those are awesome, Deborah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're right. Stories can transform us and are way bigger than any one individual, but they definitely inspire us and keep us going. So I love that perspective. When people look back on your life and contributions, what do you want them to say? Another loaded question.
I know, it's like, what I want them to say and what they will say are two different things, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, right. I hope that when people look back on the contributions I made, not only from my family and those contributions of raising, I think, a really great kid and having a long marriage, a successful marriage. And those are things that I hope people look back and say, that's really cool. There are many people that do that. That's pretty cool. But then the other kind of sort of thing on the other side that we're talking about was that I hope people say that I was rock solid and stood for what I believed in, and that I always did the right thing and had the grit to not waver no matter the challenge or the heat. And that's it.
I love that, Deborah. And I will speak as one person, but I suspect I speak for a lot more to say that you are living that every day and you're bringing the rest of us along with you. So you are both a leader and someone who lives by rock solid values, one of the many reasons I so admire you. Deborah, where can people go to find more about you and Missouri Life?
MissouriLife.com is probably the best place. And I probably should have searched to this, but I didn't. I'm not on it a lot because, God, there's so much social media stuff. Is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn too. So it'd be just Deborah Marshall and from MissouriLife.com on LinkedIn. And I don't know my LinkedIn address, but I'm sure you can find me by searching me there. So those probably are the best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, we will be sure to send folks to your website. Deborah, include that in the liner notes of today's. There's a throwback, liner notes. I think I've used the wrong expression, but at any rate, we'll make sure to send people to MissouriLife.com and to LinkedIn to find you. Deborah, I love working with you. I've learned so much today. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for spending time with me.
Oh, you bet. And thank you for giving me the opportunity and to thinking that I bring some value to everybody's world. I love that. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything you've done for me too.
Hey, my pleasure. And right back at you, Deborah. Thanks so much. And we'll talk soon. I hope you got as much out of that conversation as I did. I want to say thank you so much to Deborah Marshall and the team at Missouri Life for taking time out of her busy schedule to share all of those insights and experiences in her tremendous professional background, doing this kind of communication, marketing, and advertising work. And all of you, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you like the show, please rate and review it, leave 5 stars, and then share a little bit about what impacted you or made a difference in your life. I also want to say thank you, as always, to the editor of this podcast, Lee Williams. And until next time, remember that social impact work is soul work. Keep leading. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.